everyone. Welcome. My name is Tiffany Marzouk. I am an attorney with Allcock Marcus. Welcome to episode 20 of the Marcus Hour. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your morning. I know it's a busy time of year, so we're excited that everyone is here this morning. Few housekeeping tips, and then I'll introduce the episode and introduce our hosts today. So just want to make sure everybody's muted. I don't think that'll be a concern, but just want to avoid any kind of disruption to the presentation this morning. Secondly, any and all questions are welcomed, encouraged. Ask as many as you have. I know some people did submit questions beforehand, but you can just put them in the chat. We will monitor the chat, make sure all of those are answered. Depending on how long the presentation goes, as I said earlier, we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We will hopefully be able to have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. But if not, if we only get to a couple of questions or if we don't get to any, we will make sure that we respond to everybody's questions, and we'll send it out to all of the attendees and everybody that signed up, as we'll also send out a recording of this and the slides so that everybody has that information. And if some people weren't able to join us, everyone will be able to take part. Lastly, we do have a little trivia game. We'll have two questions, little trivia questions. One will be Celtics focused. One will be Patriots focused. And I'll give a little bit more information about that as the questions pop up. So pay attention, and maybe you'll be a lucky winner of some of our tickets. So now that that's out of the way, welcome again to episode 20. This is electronic voting for board members and property managers. What has changed and how to implement electronic voting and virtual meetings in your community association. That was a mouthful, Jake. I'm going to assume that that was your title.
Yeah, probably.
Our hosts here are Stephen Marcus and Jake Marcus. Jake Marcus is a partner with Allcock Marcus, and Stephen Marcus is our Chief Information Officer. Both have quite a bit of knowledge and expertise on general representing condominiums and homeowners association, and also on this topic. So very lucky to have them, but most lucky to have Peter Westhaver joining us here from Barkan Companies. He's a vice president there. Not only does he have 25 years of experience in property management, but he also helped with the passage of the electronic voting section of 183A and helped to draft the bill that was passed. So very lucky to have him, not only with his general experience, but also with his expertise on this particular topic. So he will be very helpful to us in answering any of those more pointed questions. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jake. Again, I'll monitor the chat, make sure, to put all of your questions in there. We'll make sure that those are answered. And again, keep your eyes peeled for the trivia. So I'll pass it over to you, Jake.
Thank you, Tiffany. Yeah, we shared the screen halfway through Tiffany's intro. Those are our mugshots. And you don't have to look at our actual panels during the episode, so you'll get a little more of a break from that as we go through the slideshow. But yeah, we're very excited to discuss today. Elections have been a huge topic across the nation, but not what we'll be talking about today. And we will be getting to specifics of best practices with voting, how electronic voting is being implemented. We can all agree, I think, based on the changing times with COVID and the pandemic in 2020, that kind of set the tone for a lot of what occurred in the years that followed. Virtual meetings, being on Zoom every day. There was Zoom fatigue was a common phrase. Similar expressions of just being caught up in the virtual world. And it was a no-brainer to introduce in the condo world electronic voting and virtual meetings. And we have Peter to thank for getting that in front of the House and getting that passed as a bill. And it is now a law in Massachusetts. It's a law in a few different states, and I will go through an infographic on that, and we'll be able to discuss kind of what we see as best practices. Before we get started, I do want to do a poll because I do want to have an idea of our demographic of who is participating today, and mainly what we want to see is If you are a manager, a property manager or board member, you would have a different kind of position than or if you would have a different capacity if your involvement with participating in electronic. And I probably should have had unit owner as well on this one, but I think board member and property manager, we want to see how you'd be involved. Because sometimes, or if you're an attorney as well, or a vendor, or otherwise. But I think we can agree, Peter, that with a lot of these voting mechanisms, there will be a different involvement if you're a unit owner who's just placing the vote versus if you're a
Absolutely.
board member. And so can you kind of explain a little bit about what manager's involvement is with, I guess, tabulating votes or operating an election? I'm sure it's quite the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's beneficial if we start going backwards and take you back to March of 2020 a little bit, and when COVID came out and kind of put a halt to the way that we do our normal day-to-day business and in property management. We're used to having monthly meetings, annual meetings, special meetings, whatever they may be, in order to help operate the community. Never mind, the regular meetings with the board and just the board members and not the entire association. And when COVID happened and the world kind of came to a stop, we still needed to operate. It's the one of the few industries that had to keep going. You could be considered necessary staffing at properties because the property has a concierge, even the concierge might be considered not really essential, but when you don't have anyone else at the community that can help you get to various locations, property management staff became essential. So, the impetus of this here was really, we couldn't meet with boards. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't see anybody. We couldn't talk to people face to face. And our condominium documents are written as such that everyone must be in person. And so myself and a few others from the CAI, Community Associations Institute, Legislative Action Committee for Massachusetts, we got together and started thinking about what it's going to take to help change the law, Chapter 183A, to include this for everyone. And I think what we started off with, we started back in 21, January of 21, and put some language together. And it became a long, arduous process to get it into the government. The focus right away was to get the schools back up and running, get the government up and running, figure out a whole bunch of other things as we were coming out of and working with COVID that we try to push our bill through. And each session, it seemed like the bill wouldn't go through. Fortunately, with the assistance of the Mass LAC, we were able to get the bill included with another bill in regarding to housing, and we were fortunate to have this passed. And so how does this change property management? How does this change the way that we operate within the communities? Well, the ability to have a meeting virtually and have it count as an actual meeting is phenomenal. You mentioned Zoom, and I know that there are other platforms that are out there for virtual meetings, but Zoom has really helped transform our industry. We can have meetings where homeowners don't have to be home any longer. They don't have to be in the lobby of their communities. Board members who may travel can Zoom in rather than not have the meeting at all. And so the way that the community operated became a little bit more fluid. We were able to actually work with the boards, work with the unit owners, provide information on a more streamlined basis. And this kind of spills into annual meetings and having annual meetings virtual. Again, during COVID, we were not able to meet in large groups, and having virtual meetings became the way to go. And I'm pushing here a lot on the virtual meeting because the meeting itself, if you look at most condominium documents, and Stephen, you probably know more about this than anybody, they had the word, you must be present. It must be a physical person, and must be in physical presence. And that just wasn't working anymore. So We helped with identifying the ability to have a quorum at a meeting electronically, voting electronically, and just having, operations occur electronically. So that's really kind of how it all started and what we were looking to do.
Absolutely. And it only made sense. It only made sense to have virtual meetings. There was just no way, and there were, as Peter touched on, there are some governing documents that may say at the annual meeting is to occur on the third Thursday of March at the town hall of our association. There are other governing documents that may say it shall occur on the third Thursday of the month, but may not specify a location. So I think this kind of enables boards and managers to ensure that there's more clarity on that you can do it basically virtually, regardless. And we'll touch on some of and it does look like we have an pretty even vote for board members and managers, and then there are also others who have voted. And looks to be a good split. So we'll definitely try to address what we're seeing from board members' perspective versus a unit owners even, and their participation and being able to attend meetings virtually. The statute in Florida does say specifically, and Peter touched on this as well, there's Zoom and other platforms, as long as the electronic or interactive electronic video conference call allows you to simultaneously communicate, you'll be able to hold these meetings virtually. And yeah, so it's basically a Zoom or that type of similar.
Jake,
conference call.
if I may as well, just because you need to have the ability to go back and forth, but it doesn't mean that, similar to this meeting here, doesn't mean that you can have people just interject throughout the entire meeting. You can hold all questions to the end. You can have questions in the beginning, have questions at the end, and have your meeting in between. But it's just having the ability to communicate via the chat function or the raise your hand function or whatever. As long as you can speak throughout the meeting, or at least communicate, whether it's speaking.
So, as you said, as with this webinar, there's an ability, as I read the new law, to have a meeting where the communication is either by chat or raising hand and not opening the mic. Have you thought about, or is your experience with boards who have done this even before the law passed, as to how boards and managers are handling that, whether you want people to raise their hands, which can sometimes get out of control, or if you can keep them more organized if there's question and answers and chat?
So similar to what we're doing here, it's a team atmosphere. So you have your manager who is most likely running the meeting, or the board chair is running the meeting. But there's usually at least two people, more than two people providing this meeting. And so someone can go through and read through the chats and hold questions to the end. And then you can go through those questions systematically and answer the questions. Or you can do the raise your hand function when there's an open time period. So we have some meetings that start with a 30-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute open session of question and answers. So random unit owners can ask any questions they want. Then they close off everyone's microphone so you can't hear anybody. And the board has its meeting. And then they reopen the meeting again for 30 minutes at the end of the meeting. And they go through the questions through the chat function. And then they have the raise the hand function. So they're really trying to be as interactive as possible with the unit owners while still having an open meeting for all.
And one of the benefits, even with raising hands, maybe I'm digressing too much, but with the raising hands and with Zoom or Teams meetings or GoToMeetings, you can unmute one person so you don't have the problem, for example, that we see at some board meetings, but definitely at annual meetings,
Sure.
where 20 people want to scream or talk at once. There's more control where people are able to have the time to ask their question, then go back on mute, have it answered without there being a free-for-all or interruptions. Have you found the meetings, where you have done this already, have you found the meetings to be more controlled?
Absolutely.
More orderly,
No,
maybe even quicker?
much more orderly. That's more the key here is, so when Zoom first came out, or when it first became prevalent in 2020 and through 21 and whatnot, as we were all still trying to figure out what is Zoom and how does it work, and how do electronic meetings actually occur. If you recall, there were individuals who would come in and hijack a meeting and then play, racy videos, or someone would just have their microphone off and just be talking to their neighbor the entire time and completely disrupting meetings. I think we've all now gotten to a point where the Zoom etiquette, or the virtual meeting etiquette, has come to a place where you can have a meeting, people know that they're just going to raise their hand, they're going to come off of mute, they're going to go back on mute, self-regulate themselves. And it's become a much more efficient way of having a meeting, instead of having, as you mentioned, in-person meeting where you could have 2, 3, 4, 5 different people raising their hand and asking questions and being more important than the other one, and causing a little bit more of a catastrophe at a meeting.
And do you envision boards doing meetings both in person and virtual? In other words, having the option of either?
Hybrid versions of meetings.
Hybrid, that's the word.
Yeah, hybrid versions of meetings, in my personal opinion, are tough to manage, because what typically will happen is you'll have individuals with a computer, and that computer volume can only go so far. And if you're in a room and there's 30 people in a room and there are people that are on Zoom, you may not be able to hear everybody in the room, or they may not be able to see what's happening on the screen. So your technology for an association might need to be amped up. You may have to have a screen that you can show everybody that what's happening. You may have to have, in one of my communities, we have what's called an owl, which is a video piece of equipment that essentially it spins in 365, and anyone who speaks, the camera focuses on that person, so that everyone seems to be a part of the community. And if you're virtual away from that meeting, at least you can see who's talking in the room and direct your questions or comments to that individual.
Okay. I've also, this is going very 3,000 miles west, but on September 22nd, 2023, California, the governor signed into law revisions to their electronic virtual meeting law, whereas before the law in California had been that you had to do it both at a location, but you could offer virtual as well. There's now, unless there are votes, for example, in an election, the ability to just have it all electronically. And the only reason I mention California is I know that at least one person on the on this webinar is asked the question from California, and the other reason is, as Jake knows very well, trends, seeing the future. All you have to do is look to California or Florida, and maybe they overregulate. But if something's going to come up for some reason over the past 40 years, it seems to be Florida or California that introduced things first. So, but they're a little behind us on this one. But they must have had some unit owners who were concerned about why there had to be a physical location, but I'm not sure what it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think, and that kind of goes to this infographic that we're showing on the screen right now. A lot of states came in at different times, and Steve touched on Florida. I'm licensed to practice in Florida and Massachusetts, and as I mentioned, I'll be going to the Dolphins versus Patriots in Miami this weekend. That's a tip for the trivia question coming up in a little bit. But anyways, in Florida, they actually enacted the statute 718.128 for electronic voting in 2015. So they were way ahead of the curve on this. And they're obviously the Florida one, which will, or the Massachusetts one, which we'll show on the screen, is a 3-paragraph pretty straightforward and very to the point of what entails virtual meetings, what is a electronic voting, and when we'll kind of get to that. Florida's is counting on my screen, 1 paragraph with 3 subsets that are basically that it entails what each unit owner must provide. Second paragraph, the online voting system requirements with that. And it does say something about, I do see we had a question about storage of votes. It says in paragraph 2, subsection E, it says able to store, the association uses an online voting system that is able to store and keep the electronic votes accessible to election officials for recount, inspection, and review purposes. So election officials, that's kind of that would probably be either the manager, potentially the attorney, but also the whatever software you're potentially using. That's something I think we should touch on as well. But yeah, back to so Florida has 6 paragraphs with multiple subsections. So it's a lot more involved. But either way, I think let's touch on,
Jake, if I may, Jake, so you mentioned that Massachusetts is 3 paragraphs, and that is correct. It's short and sweet, but even so, we could also amend it going forward to add different things as well. Because it was not perfect when we wrote it. It's not perfect now. I don't know if it'll ever be a perfect way of doing it, but at least it's a start.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's a start. It's here. We'll see what works and what doesn't work. We'll be right in I mean, as managers, as attorneys, as board members, we'll be involved on the day-to-day and see how these elections unfold with this new statute enacted. And yeah, I just sent another poll out so we practice in Massachusetts, Florida, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine. We have and we cover a lot nationally as well. We've gone to a lot of national CAI events, which is Community Associations Institute. We encourage all participants to become a member of CAI. It's a great organization. It has a lot of resources for board members, for property managers. But yeah, we've been involved a lot, have seen a lot of what has occurred with not only this topic, but a lot of other topics. So yeah, we have a lot of Massachusetts participants, and I think the important thing that Peter noted is, and with what we're seeing in California, there can be changes. There most likely will be changes. We just have to see kind of how it unfolds as we move forward.
But there's another point, and it goes into a couple of questions that somebody in the audience asked. And it's the law gives the ability of associations, so boards, to come up with policies, procedures, and rules relating to how meetings will occur. So, for example, a board could say all meetings have to be at a physical location. All meetings can be electronic or virtual, or that all meetings can be hybrid, and make other such decisions. So the question was, can an annual meeting be structured to defer a live election and allow for what I call a candidates night, so the candidates can speak, and then after that that session, after the candidates night, to then have a digital election after the annual meeting has concluded. And I think the answer is that, as I read the new law, it provides the flexibility for the board to do that, or to make any other decisions that it may in terms of the administration of annual meetings, board meetings, and votes. The second question, which same person, but this has come up a couple of times in pre-submitted questions, is the idea of private or secret ballots. So I'm going to focus on Massachusetts for a moment. In Massachusetts, beneficial interest, percentage interest of unit owners also dictate how unit owners vote. So unit owners with a higher beneficial interest get a higher, bigger vote than people with a lower percentage interest based on relative fair value when the master deed was recorded. And because of that, there was with live meetings, there was always, and without the technology, there was always a requirement that we had was that unit owners had to sign the ballots. And people are expressing a lot of concern in the questions about the privacy issues. And I guess my answer is that I still think that an electronically signed or a paper ballot signed election ballot still should be used, but with this condition that we've used for the last, or I've used for the last 45 years, that allows that the ballots, once collected, whether they're held sometimes as attorneys for the association, we hold the ballots, sometimes the manager does, but the idea and the approach we take is we are not going to let unit owners go to the manager's office or to the office at the site and look at individual ballots and see how their neighbors voted, because it's bad for the community, it's bad for privacy, and our position is we will only release the votes to see how people voted if there is a order from a court stating
Agreed.
that the association has to provide that information. And so far, maybe we've been lucky, but such a case has not been brought in Massachusetts, at least that we've been involved with.
Agreed, Stephen. So at my company, we typically do not provide the responses, the individual responses of who voted for whom. We provide, if it's a trustee election, we provide only the beneficial interest. And in some cases, I also may not even provide the percentage. And that is really dependent on what the percentage is. I may not release it simply to bear the individual who may have lost any embarrassment. If someone were to go up and want to be a trustee and receive only 5% of the vote, whereas everybody else received 50% or more, I may want to spare that individual any community embarrassment and just simply say, here are the winners. That being said, again, we don't provide specific who voted for whom answers. That's, as you mentioned, that's bad for business, bad for community. So yeah, we stay out of that as much as possible. And
all right, but you're, I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think that Barkan's position in advising boards going forward is going to be to continue having the electronic votes or the paper ballots, but them kept either by the manager or by a third party, so that they aren't released?
Our push and our request to associations is going to be to go to an electronic voting system. There are many different options that are out there today. You could Google, electronic voting in Massachusetts or electronic voting options, and there are tons of them that are out there. Personally, we've used Vote HOA Now or Election Buddy. They are options that people can pay for to get into. Some of them are more expensive than others. We also have another option. Barkan, we switched to a property management system called Sync, and Sync itself offers a platform for voting. which is also easy to do. It's a matter of the biggest challenge, I think, with the online voting portion is setting up the account, if you will. So every association has beneficial interest, as you mentioned. So many units, so much beneficial interest. And then,
Well, in some states it's equal, but Massachusetts anyway
sure,
is
but you
10%.
still have to assign that beneficial interest to somebody,
Yeah.
right? And so that upfront loading of the data is generally the most time-consuming component of any electronic vote. And as I mentioned, some companies charge more than others. There's a way that you can work with your association and with your property managers to figure out which solution is best for you. But once your information is in, it becomes relatively easy to have any votes. What will happen is I will use Vote HOA Now, for example. I've used them in the past before this law passed, and they seem to work pretty well. What ends up happening is you upload all the information, all the units, all the beneficial interest, and a single email address for each homeowner, because every home only has one vote. And we send out a notification from Vote HOA Now. It goes out and says, "Dear homeowner, you have a vote. Please, follow these instructions, click the link and take the vote." And it will send a follow-up vote. It will send another follow-up. It will send another follow-up, as many as you'd like it to have automatically, so that it makes sure that there's enough for a quorum. It makes sure that there's enough people that are actually voting before the end of that vote, or before the end of the annual meeting or whatever meeting may be coming to discuss the vote. And so those programs are out there and they are very helpful. Right now, or previous to August, you would have to go to everyone's home. And if you don't get quorum, you might have to start knocking on doors the night of an annual meeting to make sure people are home and get them to sign a paper ballot, or sign something for quorum, a proxy, anything to make sure that meetings are legitimate meetings in the eyes of the condominium association. But with this new law, we're able to, and the help with Vote HOA Now or other electronic voting platforms, it actually helps establish quorum and helps establish the annual meetings for associations.
And if I could pick off another question, questions are sort of pouring in. How do you limit digital voting to one vote per unit? And I think, Peter, you've told me in the past that the software is sophisticated enough that it will only allow the one unit to vote once.
Right.
It still may be by beneficial interest in Massachusetts, but not in other states. It might be equal in other states, but there are safeguards, and the software is pretty sophisticated that it can make sure that there aren't that if you have 100 units in the condominium, that you don't get 150 ballots.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, then the other question, this might apply to me. What about accommodating owners who are not computer literate or even smartphone literate? I think the law at least infers that the way that meetings and elections and votes are held, that people should be able to communicate. So I assume that associations would be kind enough to offer some kind of accommodation. And if there's a disability as the reason, then you probably have to provide the reasonable accommodation. And then to pick off one other question, there's a question as to whether you have to amend the master deed or bylaws to allow for this. So the master deed is declaration in other states. The answer is good with what Peter and the Mass LAC did, which is this applies to condominiums formed before, during, or after the effective date of this law. So there is no need to amend your documents to provide for what Section 24 provides. Section 24 trumps anything in your governing documents.
So, Stephen, if I can go back, you mentioned the individual that had a question about if they're not computer literate or smartphone literate. So certainly there are people that are out there that are not capable of using computers for various reasons. And generally, at least in the associations that we manage, they're known individuals. They're known individuals in their association. And so we know that there is, for example, 6 people at XYZ community that don't use the computer, in which case we follow up with them with a written ballot, written format. Everything goes through the mail, or maybe we will stop by and hand deliver as well. But we continue to ensure that everyone who is at the community has an option to vote and has an option to be present at meetings and gets the same information as everyone else.
Okay, perfect. And good news that amending documents anywhere in the country is always a chore and a task, and the more units, the tougher. I do really like what I mentioned earlier about the legislation, that you don't have to go back, at least in Massachusetts, and amend your documents to have this take effect. That it was effective on the. Go ahead.
That was the main point of us getting together, was to put this together so that it would supersede all the individual condominium documents, because trying to get anything passed or an amendment passed for your association depends upon the type of association you have, could be very tricky. You could need a supermajority, 67% or 75% of the owners and their mortgage companies to allow a change to happen. And you may never get that, depends upon the makeup of your community, in which case you could never have this happen. So having this part of Chapter 183A, Section 24, creating this new section, is phenomenal because it makes it easier for everyone to be able to follow this.
And then my final comment, and then I'm going to go back to what I promised earlier about not speaking, is I do want to thank you. You are co-chair of the Massachusetts Legislative Action Committee of CAI for many of the years that this was, for a few years that this was, initial years, this was when it was filed. And we applaud the Mass CAI LAC for what it did. Now, Jake, I'll give you back the microphone.
We got to put the mute button on you where you like get muted for a few minutes, like pardon the interruption, that old Sports Center show. And we could have you or sit in the corner with like a muzzle. He actually
You're only
muted.
encouraging him.
Yeah, that'll get him to talk more. Yeah, and to that point, I know, and again, sorry to keep bringing up Florida, but a lot of things do start and end there. I did see one question. I think a large reason why they were ahead of the curve and did it in 2015 is probably because of snowbirds, people being absentee, probably just to encourage more voting. And yeah, Peter's tireless efforts to make sure that this got passed encourage more voting. There's a huge number of benefits. In Florida, they have a opt-in. So for the computer illiterate or people who are averse to technology for whatever reason, you still have the, at least best practice I see, where you can still have the right to submit a paper ballot to ensure that, you know, everyone's accommodated in the community. And that goes back to the hybrid approach. Have a meeting in person. If you have the fancy OWL software, that's always good. And things like that can just make sure things run smoothly, even from afar. So yeah, the statute, this is a lot of wording on this page. The first two cover the virtual meetings, basically the satisfaction of quorum requirements as it pertains to attending virtually. And then subparagraph C discusses the electronic means of voting and ability to be present, as Peter mentioned earlier in the presentation. So yeah, I mean, I think, as I touched on, this is just a huge development for Massachusetts. It is going to assist with a lot more engagement in communities. I think we can all agree, whether you're a board member, a manager, attorney, a vendor, whatever it may be, it can be, I'm looking at this picture and the faces look really weird. Sorry. On the screen, I think
It's certainly not a homeowners association meeting, Jake, where everyone's happy and smiling.
something's going on there. Yeah, exactly. They look too happy. I don't know what's going on. The eyes look messed up, but either way. But the ability to be able to vote virtually, or vote electronically and attend virtually. I know, so for example, I was just speaking to a manager and a president of a board recently of a 700 unit association. They said at some meetings, 700 units, that's 7 with 2 zeros. So that's 700 units. They say they only get single digit participants for some meetings. That would mean 1 through 9. That's like 0.1%. That's ridiculous. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And then running for board, I mean, that's a thankless position too. It might help with getting more people to run if they know the community is more active. I think there are a lot of people who want to make sure that things run smoothly in their community. This is an important asset, probably sometimes the most important investment that people make. COVID caused it to be a lot more, there can be a lot more strain on communities, but we want to get also to kind of best practices. Or actually, let me get to the top 6 reasons. First, it's now legal per statute. That's a good reason to be able to implement this. There's clearly a shift, as we mentioned at the beginning, since COVID especially, to have more functionality as far as voting and just membership participation. It actually reduces fraud. There are a lot of people who are averse to technology, that they think things will get rigged through the system, and all that, but it actually defers fraud. There's less chance for error typically. And yeah, that's a pretty important reason. Inclusivity, it will help as far as, let's say someone is a snowbird and they're in California or Florida and they want to attend their virtual meeting or the annual meeting in Massachusetts. They will now be able to do so. And with all this technology, it's a good thing to be able to encourage participation and being able to get people, even if they're 3,000 miles away, or even further, if they're all the way in Australia, they can still participate as long as they have Wi-Fi or whatever.
Jake, if I can just jump in, you're about to get into convenience, but I can't stress enough at how great it is that the inclusivity and the convenience factor is there for anybody in an association. For most homeowners, this is their single most important investment and expensive investment that they have. And it's, it behooves them not to be a part of the community and to know what's going on and to understand how their community is being run. It is their asset and they only want to see it mature and grow in value. And allowing this to happen electronically gives them an opportunity to be a part of that voting process or the governing process for the community to ensure that their asset is going to improve in value.
Absolutely. And yeah, it can behoove you to be by the fact that people don't participate in something that's valuable. I mean, this is something that you're investing in, and it's just I get there are uninvolved owners. They just want to, all right, anything happens, but there are requirements to meet a quorum in a lot of governing documents, and if that's not met, important decisions will not be made. And you have to adjourn meetings. You have to set up basically go door to door almost to get people to vote, or email people if you have their emails, hopefully. Then again,
with the rise of investor owners too, it becomes more of a challenge to go door to door. No longer are Mr. and Mrs. Smith living in every unit. It's Mr. Investor who or Mrs. Investor who is somewhere else, somewhere other part of the country, or even other part of the world, who may not know what's going on and may not have a vested interest. All they care about is the rent from their renter. But again, this allows that ability to allow them to join in the major decisions that have to be made at each association.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Looks like
I apologize for hijacking that part of this meeting.
No, that's helpful. But apparently we lost another panel. We lost a panelist. He's
Someone's gonna have to fill the void, so I'll just keep talking then.
yeah, that's
Told
gonna
him to go into the corner. What did you expect?
yeah, I did tell him to do that. That's true. Yeah, we'll need like 10 voices to fill that void. But yeah, no, the convenience factor, and Peter mentioned a few different softwares that you can use. Feel free to reach out to myself as well. We've seen quite a few softwares being developed, still being developed, that may be able to streamline this process for you. And the expenses can range, but depending on your needs, I may be able to a few vendors that I've been in touch with, or figure out the best solution for your specific needs. Again,
Yeah, and Jake, just to touch base on that as well, like our property management software system is developing this and has developed this. And I think that you're going to see other major software companies for property management software include this into their current and existing portfolio or offerings. It's a source of revenue for that company. And why let it go out the door when you have all the information already there? As I mentioned previously, the hardest part about setting this up is the setup. It's gathering all that information, putting it into a format that this other company can then translate it into their software. But if your property management software system can do the vote, you already have all the information there. And it's just a matter of pulling it right in and creating the vote.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that is, yeah, there's just easier ways to do this than hand tabulating the votes.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, that goes to the next point, costs. It'll be less costly in the long run. Even if it may be to purchase one of these softwares, it could be fairly expensive at the initial outlay, but you got to keep in mind you're saving all the tracking of ballots and just manpower to be able to tabulate and continue voting in the way that we've always done. And yeah, there can be other ways that kind of drive down costs as well, which it may be depending on how big your association is, how we can best set up the electronic software that you end up using.
Production value is definitely something to think about and consider. I mean, if you think about stamps today are what, 77 cents or somewhere in that ballpark, plus the paper, plus the time to print it, plus the time to stamp it, send it out, the time for an individual to make the decision, return, send all of that information, and then the time it takes to receive, count, recount, make sure everything's squared away, tabulate, do all of that. It seems easy, but when you're doing it, it depends on, again, how big your community is. If it's a 4-unit community, great, you can do that pretty easily. It's not a big problem. But if it's 400 units, it becomes a little bit more time consuming.
When did stamps go up from 5 cents?
Stephen, it's been a few years now.
Okay. How much the eggs cost? How much the eggs cost?
Eggs are very expensive. If you go to
Okay,
Costco, though, Costco, they're cheaper at Costco.
I'm going on mute again.
What
when's
about yeah, so yeah, and also as far as yeah, and then just attending the meetings, it saves a lot of people time to drive to the meetings if they're trying to rush back from work or what have you, all of that, and less fraud, and yeah, it's time for this to happen. And yeah, what we can discuss, feel free to reach out on using an app versus a website, etc. Wow, look at that. Just as you asked, Stephen. For the few people still the brave people who have stuck around through this, it's now your time to shine, Tiffany.
Okay, so question is going to pop up on the screen. The first two, no, turn it, Jake.
Uh-oh, sorry.
You ruined it. I just want to make sure when you're writing in the chat, just make sure that you're writing to everybody so that everyone knows it's fair who had the first response. So, okay, now you can turn it. Everybody ready?
Ready, set, Go.
Okay, that was quick. Stefan Baptista is our winner. Very fast.
Congrats, Stefan.
Congratulations.
Perfect.
Steven. Oh, Stefan. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
and 3 people had it.
I know. That's amazing, but
That was really quick.
that was quick. That was fast.
That was good.
All right. So
Congrats, Stefan. That's a good.
yes, I will. I have your email. Amazing. So I will reach out to you with the game and the ticket information. So don't worry. Thanks everyone for playing. I'll be back for our Patriots trivia question shortly. It was
Yes.
6, Georgie.
Oh, 6. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah. And then just a few more best practices. And I came across the first one I put here. I came across recently, actually. Keep your owner roster updated as much as possible. I came across a roster recently, and it was from like 4 years ago. Because one of my buddies, I said, "Oh, I didn't know you live here." And I texted him, and he goes, "I haven't lived there in 3 years." And I look at the date, and I'm like, "Ooh, okay." Keep that updated. So you don't want to be sending out notices to incorrect emails or addresses. So that's an important one to remember. Verify the voting certificates and proxies. Make sure that that the proxy. Let's say someone there could be a situation where someone submits a hand ballot or proxy vote, and then they also vote electronically. And if those differ, you have a problem. You're gonna have to figure out, wait, which one's accurate. Usually it'll be the last one you receive. Maybe the way to do it, but pay attention to that. That's something that might get a little murky. Election notices. Those are usually very procedurally detailed, and importantly here, we'd recommend kind of making sure that you comply with what the notice says in the governing documents. So it's important to have an attorney review that. Prepare the staff for election day. Can be chaos. There might be protests. There might be people walking down I-93. Hopefully not. But you can we were going to talk about protesters, but I think we're far enough past the election, unless anyone strongly wants to discuss the recent election of the United States.
Yeah, Jake, let's move on.
Fair enough. Yeah, 3 things you avoid: religion, election, and what's the third one? There's a third one. Whatever. Anyways, yeah, money. Yeah, exactly. That'll always confuse things. Attorney and or security present at election, that goes to the same idea. Just maintain order at these meetings. Hire an election this goes to the question of like tabulating votes and being able to make sure that fraud is kind of eliminated, eradicated, whatever it may be. Having someone monitor the election adds assurance and make sure that everything's legitimate. And then just ensure accessibility and transparency. And there was a recent statutory change in Florida related to board members and property managers as to the thrust of it is basically to add transparency for all board members. There was a large embezzlement case of multi-millions in Florida. Everything bad seems to happen in Florida, unfortunately. And that's kind of why we end up with a huge body of law in the Condo Act down there. But they added certain parameters related to board member requirements. And a lot of it is just making sure that things are transparent as far as the financial record keeping and everything in between. So those are some of the general best practices. What we've seen so far, this is very new, but I mean, Peter, what have you seen anything specific so far?
As far as just how it's worked, I mean,
Implementation. How does it run more smoothly? Is it more efficient? I mean, I would guess yes.
it's much more efficient. The answers are provided right away. you know, as I mentioned, we use a product on another property that the votes would just come in. The system would provide the answers as to what the tabulations were. No second guessing needed. It was all computer generated. It just made it so much easier to figure out and determine what the answers were. You know, similar to doing like a Survey Monkey or whatever. You know, you're going to get answers right away, and you're going to get data points that you can provide to unit owners immediately. So it's pretty good to use a voting platform and the electronic platform.
Are these virtual meetings also going to, we haven't really talked about the sometimes grueling and difficult job that condominium managers have, and you have to be experts at everything, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and also in the old days travel to tons of meetings. Someone made the comment
In the
that
Ice
they thought
Age, in the old days, Ice Age.
maybe this will cut down on managers getting burnt out if they were attending 15
So
board meetings a month instead of
I can
12.
say unequivocally, even for myself personally, it is much easier to have a meeting start and end when I'm at home than it is to go to a meeting that is an hour away, have it start at 6 o'clock, end at 9 o'clock, and then drive home by 10 o'clock. So having virtual meetings for the manager's perspective is phenomenal. It allows for a lot more flexibility to be at meetings and to have certain start times that most owners would like to have. You know, one of the biggest challenges we receive as managers is the homeowners say that they work a full-time job and then they have to come home and have to deal with this. And while I completely agree with that and understand that, the property managers are also working full-time jobs and then are doing additional meetings on top of that. And the time commitment for a property manager is much greater than a 9 to 5 or a 40-hour a week. And so when you can take a meeting at home or in comfortable surroundings, it is much more beneficial for the health and well-being of the manager. With that said, it can be a double-edged sword where boards think, well, now we can just Zoom whenever we want to. We can just have meetings all the time. Yes and no. It's a good thing to have board meetings as frequently as you can, but again, keep in mind, managers have a lot of different things going on, a lot of different balls in the air, and this does make it easier, but it doesn't mean that it should be happening every day.
And for board members, they don't have the commute, but they, in most cases, but if you cut down meetings from 3 hours to 1 hour, it's also saving on their valuable time.
The efficiency, Stephen, you're hitting the nail on the head. The efficiency is fantastic. You know, when you get a group of individuals together, board members or not, even us, if we all get together, we end up talking various things and go on tangents and can make one 10-minute conversation last an hour. The same thing can happen at a board meeting. However, when you're electronic and it's one person speaking and then you raise a hand or you jump in, and it can streamline that process and just make it that much more efficient, and you can be out in time for dinner, so to speak.
Fantastic. So yeah, make sure to submit any questions. We have one more question. So if you last the whole hour, again, Tiffany, show them.
All right. Patriots time. So getting your football headspace. Same rules apply. First one to answer in the chat. Again, just make sure Jake.
You can't see that. That's Jake and your buddy Tom Brady.
We no longer have Tom Brady, unfortunately, so you won't be able to see him, but
It's also not, he's not related to the question, so don't worry. Just make sure that you are you have your chat set to everybody. And with that, go ahead, Jake.
Oh,
Wow.
Name the New England Patriot coach of the 1986 Super Bowl team.
And the hint is it's not Bill Belichick.
or Gerard Mayo.
Okay, Lily.
Wow. Whoa.
Response.
Lily,
That's our winner.
Lily Valentino.
Are you gonna,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
amazing. Okay, that was quick. She knew it. Lily, same as our winner with the Celtics tickets. I'll be in touch with you. I have your email from the attendee list, so I'll make sure that you get your tickets to the Patriots, one of the games.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So with that, because it is 11:03 and want to make sure, again, being respectful of everyone's time. So, we were pretty good about, answering questions as they came in. We will go through all of them and any ones that we missed, or anyone can put in additional questions in the chat right now. We will send out the webinar recording, copy of the slides, and answers to all of those, all the questions that we missed out to everybody next week. So be on the lookout for that. I think there was also a question in here. Somebody had joined late. So everybody that signed up for the webinar will, for the podcast, will get a copy of all the information. So no worry about that. And with that, thank you so much again to Peter for joining us. I hope this was informative. It was a nice conversational hour, which is always great. So thank you again for everybody for joining us. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. And again, I'll be in touch with our winners next week.
And thank you again to all of you from Allcock Marcus. It has been phenomenal being here in this panel, and look forward to working with you guys all in the future. And let's go Patriots.
Go Pats. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Peter.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving,
Thanksgiving to
everybody.
everyone.
Appreciate it.